for land.
Thank you. I'm going to start with our territorial acknowledgement. In keeping with regional protocol, I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and by honoring the sovereignty of the Six Nations, Mohawk, Cayuga, Onondaga, Oneida, Seneca, and Tuscarora, and their land where we are situated and where the majority of our work takes place. In this acknowledgement, we hope to demonstrate respect for the treaties that were made on these territories and remorse for the harms and mistakes of both the far and recent past. We pledge to work towards partnership with a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank everyone who's able to join us. And if you're watching by video at a later date, hello to you as well. I want to welcome everyone to Buffalo's Untapped Power to Police Discipline Workshop. My name is Tombier Peart, and I am the Director of Policy Advancement at the Partnership for the Public Good. PPG is a community-based think tank that unites over 315 community organizations working to build a better Buffalo. Each year, our partners use a democratic process to create a community agenda, 10 ways that state and local governments can act to improve the Buffalo Niagara area. And so today we will be talking about police discipline, and there's been an inability for the city of Buffalo to fire or discipline police officers with misconduct records. Yet Buffalo's legislative history and court decisions empower the city with authority to discipline officers outside of the provisions in the contract with the police union. Today's speakers will discuss unchecked police misconduct, problems with transparency and accountability, and solutions we can take today. There will be time for questions at the end. And if you do have any questions while the presenters are talking, feel free to drop them in the chat and we'll raise them up at the end. We also received some questions prior to this presentation that we will answer those as well at the end. And so, all right. We have a great group joining us today, so let's get started. To kick us off is Miles Gresham, PPG Policy Fellow and author of the report, The City of Buffalo's Untapped Power to Police Discipline, Discipline Police Officers, who will provide an overview of his findings. We also have Dejon Hall, author of the Buffalo Police Advisory Board's Police Oversight Bill. Try saying that super fast. And with that, I will pass it off to Miles.
Thanks, Tombier. Thank you, Cricky. Thanks, everybody, for being here. So as Tombier said, my name is Miles Gresham. I am a policy fellow here at PPG, and I'm also a former public defender. My pronouns are he, him, his. Last year, the country kind of, erupted, right? And for a lot of people, this eruption caught them off guard. And for other people, it was a long time coming, right? Because last year, the country found out during the pandemic that the police had murdered George Floyd, and there was video that was viral of that incident. And also learned about the police murder of Breonna Taylor, who was gunned down while she was sleeping in her home. These are just two of the many instances of police using excessive force that results in the death of a civilian, and more often than not, those civilians are Black or brown people. So in the city of Buffalo, that outrage was reflected, but it was also amplified by the community's knowledge of lots of police instances of misconduct and excessive force that have led to the brutalization, the killing, the traumatization of civilians in this city as well. So one of the things that people have been looking at as a remedy to that police misconduct is to make it easier to discipline and fire those officers that commit this misconduct and that threaten the lives and safety of civilians. Can we go to the next slide, please? there were several groups that formed in the wake of what happened last summer. One of those is Free the People Western New York, which is a group that I and others on this chat are or were a part of. And one of the demands that Free the People amplified was increased police oversight, right? The idea that the power to discipline and fire police should be altered, and it should be given to the people rather than residing inside the police department, which it currently does. That was an amplification of an earlier call to action from Buffalo's Police Advisory Board. And they issued a report, which Dejan Hall worked on, which called for a specific system of police oversight. But one of the things that we kept hearing when we spoke to elected officials, when we talked to people who were familiar with the subject, was that, you know, state law gets in the way of us being able to change the police disciplinary system in the country, and in Buffalo in particular. So if we could go to the next slide. So the issue is unchecked police misconduct results in people dying, people being permanently injured, people being traumatized in the city of Buffalo. We saw that with last summer with Martin Gugino, who was injured while peacefully protesting. We've seen that in the killings of Jose Hernandez Rossi, of Wardell Meach Davis by Buffalo police officers, both of whom were unarmed. We saw that in a police lieutenant. So one of the police management ranks calling a Black woman a horrible sexualized epithet on camera. And we've also seen that in the instance of a young kid, a high school student, an honor student, actually being shot by a police officer in 2012, which ended up costing city residents $4.5 million by way of a lawsuit settlement. That child was paralyzed, he's confined to a wheelchair, and that same officer had several complaints against him and went out and shot someone else last year. So that is the issue. But what I wanted to look at is what can we actually do about it? What does the state law actually say? Next slide, please. So what we found is that police in Buffalo and around the country have a history of hurting, killing people unnecessarily and getting away with it. It's also a bigger problem because it erodes the confidence that people have in the police. If you talk to people who are who look like the people who are often brutalized by police, their confidence in police is very low. And it's because this relatively small group of police is protected by the police apparatus as a whole, and it erodes the trust that society has in police. And that means that when situations arise where people would traditionally call the police, they're less likely to do so. They're less likely to cooperate because they are afraid that the police are unable to distinguish between criminals and law-abiding civilians. And also, they're concerned that when Black or brown people speak up, when they advocate for themselves, when they challenge police, they will be targeted for brutalization and for excessive force. So that's why this issue matters so much. Next slide, please. So last year, Mayor Brown acknowledged on national television that the police union is and has been a real barrier to police reform in the city of Buffalo. So again, when we talked to the mayor about what we could do to change policing, he, like many others, said, well, hey, state law prevents it. So what does the situation look like now? We have an internal affairs division that is responsible for initial investigation of complaints against police officers. That division is made up of the same police officers who, the same bargaining unit as the police officers who are being charged, right? And unsurprisingly, police are cleared of wrongdoing 94% of the time. including officers like Carl Schultz, who was the officer I spoke about earlier, who shot Wilson Morales, young high school student, in 2012 and paralyzed him and cost us $4.5 million. He then went out and shot Willie Henley while he was experiencing a mental health crisis last year. Just as one example, Carl Schultz had at least 17 complaints filed against him. Internal Affairs either did nothing, or at the most he was given a talking to by one of his superiors. But at the end of the day, police are still allowed to brutalize us, get a slap on the wrist or no disciplinary action whatsoever, and then go back on the street and remain a threat to civilians and to the trust that we have in our policing system. Next slide, please. So looking at when people say, well, state law prevents us from disciplining police, what does that current system look like? Well, after the internal affairs process, if they find that there's a reason to bring an officer up on charges, those 6% of cases usually do not result in the firing of a police officer, because according to the police union contract, which governs the disciplinary process that we have in place now, police are allowed to challenge the ruling of the police commissioner at arbitration. That arbitration process is one where the arbitrators are mutually agreed upon by the police and the city. And in order to be mutually agreed upon and consistently get business as an arbitrator, you have to make everybody happy. And that often results in police being reinstated. For example, there was an officer who was fired on the spot once his property was raided. It was found that he was dealing drugs. The police commissioner at the time fired him on the spot, right? You would think that would be the appropriate response, right? But the officer, even after the officer was convicted and went to prison, the police union continued to grieve his firing. And the arbitrator in that case ended up awarding that officer almost $200,000 of back pay, which he got while he was sitting in a jail cell for the thing that he had been fired for. So that's just a couple of examples of how ridiculously ineffective this system of police discipline is. There was also, and this is not just a Buffalo issue, there was also the recent reinstatement of a deputy in Erie County after the union challenged his firing after numerous instances of misconduct, including being found to have falsified records and fell asleep on his shift and lied about it. Next slide, please. So what is the solution here? The solution, as the Police Advisory Board argued last spring, is to take police discipline out of the hands of the police union and out of the hands of arbitrators. But remember, people keep saying, well, state law doesn't allow this. State law doesn't allow this. So what I wanted to do in my report was look at what does state law actually say? And what I found was that according to the Court of Appeals, police discipline should already be what is called an impermissible subject of bargaining in places like Buffalo. So next slide, please. What does that mean? What is an impermissible subject of bargaining? You say that to someone, most people have no idea what the heck you're talking about, right? In labor law terms, what this means is that discipline should not be a subject that's allowed to be brought up in contract negotiations. And instead, police discipline should be entirely up to the city of Buffalo. The Court of Appeals has said that where municipalities were given the authority to discipline police by the state legislature prior to changes to the civil service law in 1958, that authority to discipline police is still valid. And the civil service law changes that came later do not affect that ability to discipline police. And it turns out that Buffalo is one of those municipalities that was given that authority to discipline police by the state legislature before 1958. Therefore, discipline, the entire process of bringing police up on disciplinary charges, of investigating those charges, of firing them or otherwise disciplining them for those charges, should all be outside of the scope of their union contract where it now resides. Next slide, please. So the question often comes up, well, police are, it's a labor union. Why shouldn't police have a say in how they are disciplined? The simple answer is because the Court of Appeals says that they shouldn't, for all the reasons that I just stated. The Court of Appeals has also said, and they've held this position for over 100 years, that police perform a quasi-military function. In other words, nurses, other laborers that are governed by union contracts, builders, electricians, if you don't do what they say, they don't have the power to detain you or shoot you, right? Police do. They have a special quasi-military function. They have certain powers over life and death of civilians. And in a free society, in a free republic like the United States is supposed to be, we subject military power to civilian authority. So just like our United States military is subject to the authority of a civilian commander-in-chief, the president, the Court of Appeals has said that police, because of their military function, have to be subject to civilians in the form of municipal government. And so in 1958, the civil service law was changed. There was sort of blanket disciplinary provisions that apply to all civil service employees in New York State. And those disciplinary provisions govern how civil service employees are disciplined. It gives them a lot of rights to challenge disciplinary rulings. But the Court of Appeals says, if we gave you the power to discipline police before these changes were made, those civil service law sections don't apply to your municipality. They do not apply to your police. Next slide, please. So in looking at the history of Buffalo's authority to discipline police, well before 1958, in 1914, the state legislature issued a new charter for the city of Buffalo. In that 1914 charter, the state legislature gave the Common Council the authority to discipline police. Since then, since at least 1949, the Common Council transferred that disciplinary authority to the police commissioner, and that's where it still resides. But the Common Council has the authority to change the charter, and they have the authority to take that power back and give it to an entity like the Police Advisory Board. So taking a step back, what does all that mean? What it means is that right now, we have a disciplinary system in the contract that should be considered null and void. The system that allows police to get away with the vast majority of misconduct instances, the system that clears police of 94% of wrongdoing, that system that we're following is actually not a valid system. It's not the way we're supposed to be dealing with police discipline. Right now, police discipline is supposed to rest, according to the city charter, with the police commissioner. That means that if the police commissioner decides to implement rules that say, if an officer brutalizes a civilian or violates the public trust or whatever, they're fired, he should have the authority to implement that and then to fire officers who violate those rules. That's where it should lie right now. Right now, according to the charter, the police commissioner has the authority to fire police, okay? But in theory, the Common Council, who was originally given that power by the state legislature, could take that power back and give it to another body. And that theory, next slide, please. That theory was also backed by the state attorney general. So the Police Advisory Board put forward a multi-pronged proposal to have police disciplinary authority reinstated in a civilian body, and that proposal was backed by a letter by the Attorney General of New York State, Letitia James. So this is right now we have a null and void system that we shouldn't be using anymore. we have a police commissioner who has the power to discipline and fire police today. And if the Common Council wanted, it could transfer that power to a police advisory board, which is a civilian authority. At this point, I'd like Dejan to talk a little bit about what that proposal means and what it does and how it works.
Thank you, Miles, and hello, everyone, and a pleasure to be here with you all on this afternoon. I want to start by acknowledging that there are two members who are currently on the Police Advisory Board with us, and I think that's Christine Vogel and Dominique Calhoun are on the call, and I want to acknowledge them and thank them for their work in keeping the advisory board going.
There's actually three of us, Dejan, on the board. Sorry to interrupt. Ashley Brunner is here as well.
I'm retired, so I don't know everyone on the board anymore. But
can I add, there are 4 people, because I'm Frederick Gazzoli, and I'm also on the Police Advisory Board. Thank you.
Sorry, Fred, I didn't see you.
Hi, Fred.
Anywho, so back in 2020, the Police Advisory Board created a 2-pronged model for police oversight that we submitted to the Common Council. We wanted to create a system that had not only back-end accountability, which is what most folks are accustomed to talking about, that being investigations of misconduct, how police complaints are handled, and what disciplinary actions look like, as well as the process around that discipline. We wanted to also create a system with front-end accountability that looks at policy and funding for police officers as well, because we think it's equally important, not just to look at what happens after misconduct arises, but what policies and procedures and systems allow for misconduct to happen in the first place. So we created a bill which is accessible on the city's website. If you go to the Common Council's meeting agendas, you should be able to pull it up. The first half of it would create a more formalized police advisory board. Currently, the police advisory board exists at the whim of the Common Council and is very limited to research, public outreach, and policy proposals to the Common Council. The new structure that we proposed would create a charter mandated police advisory board with the authority to propose, amend, and get rid of Buffalo police policies that are ineffective. It would force the Police Advisory Board to weigh in annually on the proposed city budget by the mayor, particularly on the piece that touches on the police budget. And lastly, whenever a vacancy would arise in the office of the police commissioner, it would be the Police Advisory Board that creates a list of nominees from which the mayor would have to appoint a new police commissioner, ensuring that all police commissioners have been approved by some aspect of the public, some aspect of civilian public, that is. The second half of the police oversight model is the creation of a community police oversight commission. This is the back-end accountability function. This would be the board, or rather the commission, that would take citizen complaints of misconduct, have its own staff to investigate those misconduct allegations, and to propose and carry out disciplinary measures when that misconduct is founded. The funding for all of that would come directly from the police budget, which is why that front-end accountability is just as important. Both of these prongs would be funded by no less than 1% of whatever the proposed police budget is. So that's what we propose, and currently I want to acknowledge also Kartika Kaur, who's on the call, who's led the push through Voice Buffalo, who is currently pushing for a ballot initiative to happen so that the people can directly act on these proposals, since the Common Council has seemed unwilling to do so. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, both to Miles for even writing the report and finding the receipts, and also to Dejan. And since we do have a very great representation of the Buffalo Police Advisory Board, I didn't know if Dominique or somebody wanted to just briefly provide any updates, if there are, about some of the oversight efforts.
Thanks for letting us attend, and thanks for having this forum. My name is Dominique Calhoun. I am a member on the Police Advisory Board. Currently, we just revamped our board. We just added on a lot of new members to make our board complete. So we are going to, in the near future, be meeting on new initiatives that we will be working on. We have a few, I can't really discuss in detail right now, but we have a few great ones that I believe will be effective and kind of add on to previous policies that the previous board did start. So I am excited, and that's why we are attending to see, where we can all collaborate and build policy, together.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And thank y'all, everybody who was able to attend. And so now, since we're towards the end, it's time for questions. If there are any questions that anybody has after this presentation, feel free to drop them into the chat and I can lift them up to either Miles and or Dejan. We did receive 3 before the beginning of this presentation, so we could go ahead and get started with those. And I will drop these into the chat in case I talk too fast. But the first one is basically, do y'all have the data over the last few years of how much things like lawsuits have cost the city of Buffalo?
I do not have that data. I don't know if the Police Advisory Board has been more successful with their subpoena efforts to get that information. But I think it's interesting to kind of look at like sort of a high and low picture of what police misconduct costs us. The Wilson Morales shooting took place in 2012. It wasn't settled until last year, but it cost us $4.5 million, right? So that's at the end of years of litigation, which cost the city. Every time the city gets sued, it hires one of the most expensive firms in the area to legislate it, right? So, or to defend it. So it doesn't like send salaried members of the law department to court to defend the city in lawsuits. It hires outside counsel. That counsel costs a lot of money, and at the end of it, the city still had to shell out in addition to all those legal fees, which probably amounted to hundreds of thousands of dollars over the course of several years of litigation for a high-end firm. Also cost us $4.5 million in a settlement to Mr. Morales. On the lower end, recently, Brittany Pemberthy, who was an attorney who I had hoped was going to be here, she got tied up in court. Brittany is a partner at Vendette Pemberthy, and much of her practice involves bringing civil suits against Buffalo police officers. She recently won a judgment of, I think it was around $10,000 for someone who had been unlawfully detained for less than an hour, right? So if we look at the low, if that's the low end, right, you know, a court can fine the city and taxpayers will have to shell out 10 grand every time the police unjustly detain someone for a few minutes and it gets challenged by an attorney. And at the high end, where police shoot someone and that individual unfortunately was paralyzed, but fortunately lived, that individual got $4.5 million, to say nothing of how much, say, a wrongful death suit might cost, which might cost more. So each instance of police conduct can cost us anywhere from $10,000 to several $1 million. So if we, look at, for example, Carl Schultz and his disciplinary record, his investigative, or rather internal affairs record, if each one of those 17 complaints had been litigated, only one of them was litigated, it cost us $4.5 million. If each one were litigated, it would bleed the city's coffers dry. So that's kind of the picture of the cost of misconduct that we have. But anyway, that would be my answer to that question.
And while I don't have the data either, I would encourage folks to look up an article from the Investigative Post from last summer, which touched on settlement costs. I think that article claimed that just 16 of the city's settlements regarding policing between 2015 to 2020 cost us a total of $12 million, most of them dealing with excessive force and negligent driving. That's all I'll add.
Thank you. So next we're going to go to Kate, and then Dominique, I see your question after that. So Kate, if you want to come off of mute, you have the floor.
Yeah, I have a question. I guess my question is not so much disciplinary actions, but I represent a lot of victims of domestic violence. And what is there any recourse? Is there anything if officers are merely not responding to calls or doing their jobs? You know, I mean, the one issue obviously is everything we've already talked about here, but I guess my other question is, what is our recourse when my client's calling 911 and no one ever shows up, or the police do show up and they say, I'm declining to arrest this person because of this or that?
Well, each case would be individualized, but if, God forbid, someone, has a record of calling 911, the police either decline to arrest a person or don't come, and then, God forbid that client gets hurt, in theory, they could bring a civil suit against the city of Buffalo. Whether or not it would be successful, I don't know, but that would be the recourse, would be to sue the city for an injury that resulted in some way from the city's inaction.
In terms of generally, like for example, I could never not just not do my job, right? Like I couldn't just go to my law office and then park in my car in the parking lot for 8 hours and not do anything. So like, is there anything that any oversight, anything that actually makes these people do the jobs that they're getting paid to do?
I mean, again, Dejan, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, this sort of goes back to what I was saying about front-end accountability. Having civilians have direct input on what the policies and procedures are of our police force, right? If it is the case that officers are showing up to the scene of crimes or alleged crimes and not taking down reports, not making, that's just generally not responding to the needs of the moment, that could constitute a misconduct violation. It should be something that folks are allowed to complain against. I will say that the police manual is currently on the city's website, and I encourage everyone here to take a look at that. And when folks are in violation of what's on that website, file a report. Even though officers are cleared 94% of the time, there are still other mechanisms to at least try to get some form of accountability. So I think that's what I'll add. Yeah, go ahead, Miles.
Thank you so much. And so I saw that Dominique put in the chat. I'm just going to read in. Dominique, if you want to add anything, feel free, since you wrote it. If the commissioner has the power to fire, when they suspend them without pay and then they go to an arbitrator and they side with the officer to return back to work, how do we protect community when the officer is costing us in lawsuits and has been proven by the commissioner to be violating policies? Does that not make the contract with the union one-sided? And can the commissioner override an arbitrator's decision?
So I'm going to start with the last part of that question first. Can the commissioner override an arbitrator's decision? Yes. In the city of Buffalo, yes, they can. They do not because they don't use that power, and that's what this report is about, right? The untapped power to discipline police. The police commissioner could fire that officer. They could override the arbitrator's decision. That's what these court cases that are in the report have to do with, where oftentimes an arbitrator ruled against a police commissioner, and the municipalities took it all the way to the Court of Appeals, which is the highest court in New York State. So yes, the police commissioner can overrule an arbitrator, but right now, the process that Dominique kind of outlined in the beginning of her question is what we deal with right now. And what the problem is that the city does not press their authority, they do not press their power to overrule the arbitrator's decision and take it to the Court of Appeals. Why they don't use that power, I don't know. We're hoping that that will change. We're hoping that the Police Advisory Board, many of the members of whom are on here, will press the Common Council to change those rules and use their charter power to do so. But yes, the police commissioner can overrule an arbitrator, but the process would look like the police then, or the police commissioner rather, or the city on behalf of the police commissioner, firing the police officer anyway. The police union would then bring suit, because the arbitration is not in court, right? An arbitrator is outside of court. So what would happen is the police commissioner would fire that officer. The police union would then sue the city of Buffalo and the police commissioner to get that officer reinstated. It would go through the appeals process probably. It would, it's unlikely to be decided at the Supreme Court level. So it would probably go to the appellate division and probably go all the way to the Court of Appeals. But the Court of Appeals relies on precedent. And with the precedent that we have, where the city of Buffalo has charter authority to discipline police, where that authority has not been given away like it was in Rochester, which is an important distinction that I'll get to later, the Court of Appeals should rule in Buffalo's favor, just like it has in every other municipality that has that same situation set up. So yes, the contract right now does function as a one-sided one, but the whole point of this report and the whole point of these court cases is that these contract provisions should be null and void anyway, and we should be ignoring them, and we should let the police union take us to court and set a precedent for the city of Buffalo in the Court of Appeals that yes, the police commissioner can overrule arbitrators with respect to discipline, because discipline was never supposed to be a subject of bargaining in the first place. So. Does that answer the question?
Perfectly. Thank you, Miles.
Okay.
Thank you. And I just wanted to raise up something else that was put in the chat. It's more of a comment. Buffalo is unique in its handling of arrests, where the DA and courts do not have access to anything until the day of court. While in New York City, even there is an arrest, police have to go through the DA to see if they should even book them. This limits or completely destroys overtime abuses through the courts. Oh, here's a question. How can we get Buffalo to run similarly so we end overtime court abuses?
Yeah, so this is something that the Minority Bar Association of Western New York has a criminal justice task force, which I'm on, Dejan is also on, and we have been pushing for this since last year. So what it would take would basically be for the DA to buy into this. They would need funding to create basically what's called a complaint room. That's what it's called in New York City. And what happens, as Shaima, I think, was alluding to, is when the police arrests someone, they bring the accusatory instrument, which is the paperwork for the charges. They bring that to the DA, and the DA reviews them. And the DA will either say, okay, we'll go ahead with these charges and arraign this person, or, this accusatory is complete BS, we're throwing this out, and then they have to let the individual go. What it would take for New York City for Buffalo to handle arrests in that manner, in the manner that New York City does, would be to have a fully funded and operational complaint room. So that would take funding for the DA. That could come from the county, it could come from the state government, and then it would take a DA who actually wants to utilize that complaint room, which in conversations that the Minority Bar has had with the DA behind closed doors, he's kind of gone back and forth on. The other thing is, the other way that you could cabin police overtime is another system that is in New York, which the Minority Bar has pushed for, which would be to have, basically you have in New York, they have a civilian employee of the police department working with the courts, and that employee schedules police so that police appear in court on their actual time, rather than having them come in whenever the DA wants them. So the way it works in Buffalo, and the reason that police are able to rack up so much overtime in our court system, is because basically the DA just tells the police officer, hey, I need you available to testify on this date and time, and no one checks to see whether or not that date and time falls within that particular officer's regular shift, or whether that officer has to come in for overtime. More often than not, it means that the officer is going to come in for overtime, even if they're there for 15 minutes, they get 4 hours of straight time for that 15 minutes that they show up in court. And we, as a public defender, I saw this every day. You'd have the courts packed with police officers. They'd sit there for 15 minutes. They'd sign a supporting deposition. They'd walk off, and they get paid for 4 hours, right? So the way that you cabin that is by having that kind of civilian police employee embedded in the courts. And every time the district attorney says, hey, officer so-and-so, I need you here to testify on this date and time, that schedule runs through that civilian employee, who then checks the officer's schedule and either tells the DA, yes, the officer can come in at that time because it's during their regular shift, or no, we need to do a different date and time so that new date and time takes place during the officer's shift, and the officer can't then claim overtime. But again, in order for that to happen, we would need buy-in from, for the complaint room, you just need the buy-in from the DA. For that system of cabining overtime, you would need the buy-in of the police department, the courts, and the district attorney. So.
Thank you. We have another question in the chat, and then I see your hand raised, Dominique. So I'm going to go to Colleen's question first and then pivot back. The question is, can you please say more about how the commissioner with the current powers to discipline would interact with or supplement the powers of an independent oversight board, especially for an individual case of misconduct? How might the board and the commissioner ideally work together?
I think that would be a better question for Dijon.
Yeah.
Sorry to put you on the spot.
That's okay. So in the proposed legislation, it's actually built in that the Commission for Community Police Oversight would not operate in isolation, but instead operate in conjunction with not only the police commissioner, but also the Erie County District Attorney. The commissioner would have the power to conduct its own investigations alongside the new oversight model, propose its own disciplinary measures, and submit its findings to the discipline committee of the commission. And where there is disagreement between the two, there is a process built in that would allow for the mayor to speak to the commission, and the commission will ultimately have the final say. So I encourage everyone to go through and read the actual legislation, because there's a lot jam-packed into there. And it's not one that completely rejects what currently exists, but folds in the necessary parts to maintain a working relationship between Police Advisory Board, the new Commissioner of Police Oversight, and the current Police Commissioner in Investigative Affairs or Internal Affairs Office.
Thank you. Dominique, you had a question?
I have a question about the body footage camera. So last year was coming up a lot that the police and the DA would withhold or would not release the footage until, sometimes after they have asked someone to take a plea. We did like protesting, rallying around getting certain footage released last year. And then I was told, but I don't know how true it is. I heard that there was a law that says that they are supposed to release it within a certain amount of time of the incident to the person that was involved in the incident. How do we try to get some type of policy or rallying around immediately getting that released? Because you have a lot of people that just want to go to work or aren't guilty that just plead down because they think that, they just want to get this behind them, when in all reality, a lot of people are innocent.
So Dominique, I'm not familiar with a particular rule that requires the police to release the body camera footage to an individual, at least not until the case is disposed of. But there were changes to the discovery laws, which is civil procedure law, I think it's 240, our criminal procedure law 240, which now require the district attorneys to turn over any evidence that they have, including body camera footage, to a defendant and their attorney before the prosecutor can declare ready for trial. And the discovery rules were also changed to say that a district attorney cannot withdraw a plea until they've declared ready and basically put all their cards on the table. So that change in the discovery law should get rid of situations where people are pleading guilty without being able to see the body camera footage that the police have. Because now the way it works, before someone takes a plea, the prosecutor should have already declared ready. And in order for them to declare ready, they have to turn over that body camera footage. And that readiness now is something that is really closely scrutinized. So before these discovery changes, a prosecutor could just basically lie and say, yeah, I'm ready for trial, and not put all their cards on the table, not turn over the footage, right? But now, in order for them to declare ready for trial, they have to submit what's called a certificate of readiness. That has to be reviewed by a judge. It has to be reviewed by a defense attorney. And so if I'm the defense attorney, if I get a certificate of readiness and there's no body cam footage, and I know that that officer was wearing a body cam, I'm going to challenge that certificate of readiness, and that's going to force the clock on the trial to run. And eventually that case may run out of time if the DA does not provide everything that they're supposed to provide within a certain amount of time. So the way it works now, there shouldn't be any situations where people are taking pleas before they're able to see the body cam footage, unless the defendant just for some reason insists on taking a plea against the advice of their defense attorney.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And Dijon just put into the chat the oversight model legislation. We will also grab that link to share for those who are not here with us. Are there any other questions? I just want to go ahead.
Tanvia, Shaima had a reply question in the chat that I just wanted to lift up. So she asked if how much is it possible to figure out how much we would save by implementing and investing in the complaints department with the DA versus not, and allowing the overtime? I'm almost certain that last year we figured out how much the city was spending on police overtime. I don't have that figure on the tip of my tongue right now, but I'm like 95% sure that figure is out there somewhere. I don't know if anybody else on this call remembers where that information is, but I'm pretty sure that it exists somewhere. So we know how much the police are spending on overtime. It's a lot. I can't say it exactly, but it's a lot. So that's one figure. How much would it cost to have the complaint room? You would have to have one DA 24/7, right? So it doesn't mean one DA working 24 hours, but you would have to, basically, you'd have to pay for a new or 3 8-hour shifts, 3 new 8-hour shifts for one DA to be in that complaint room 24 hours a day. So you could have 3 DAs doing it, you could have 2 DAs doing it, whatever, but you would have to have 24 hours of DA time. I'm sure that, you know, in the current offices that the DA have, they could probably clear out some space in a room. So I don't think they would need a lot of new equipment. They might need like one new computer or something, but it wouldn't be a huge lift. It would be a matter of probably, several $100,000 per year to set up a complaint department and to review these complaints. So. And Cricky says, yes, we do have the overtime number. So yeah, so there's that. One other thing that I wanted to point out, and then I'll give it back to Tanvia. I apologize for interrupting you, but there's an important distinction that's in the report, and that has to do with the oversight authority of Buffalo versus Rochester. When this report came out, the news interviewed me, and they interviewed Brittany Penberthy, and then they interviewed folks from the police union who said, well, you can't do what's recommended in this report because Rochester couldn't do it. That's a poor analogy. And the reason is that Rochester, their common council, or whatever their city council is called, they actually in the 80s gave away their police disciplinary authority. They took it out and they said, okay, civil service laws, section 75 and 76 now govern police discipline in the city of Rochester. Buffalo never did that. And that's talked about in this report, the court cases and the actual date of the action of the Rochester Council, and the court case which struck down Rochester's Police Advisory Board disciplinary authority is in this report. It's worth noting that that case has not yet been completely decided. It's still working its way through the appellate process, so we don't know if the Court of Appeals will side with their Rochester Police Union, or whether the Court of Appeals will say, you know, it was outside of the scope of Rochester's council's powers to give away that authority in the first place. We don't know, but it's a moot point in terms of Buffalo, because Buffalo got that authority to discipline police from the state legislature and never gave it away, never altered it, still has it today. So if you hear anybody saying Buffalo can't discipline its police outside of the provisions of the contract because Rochester can't, that's false, and this is why. So that's the only other point I wanted to make. So.
Thank you. And that was actually going to be the question. Something was just put in the chat is one small consideration for overtime versus complaint room costs is that overtime is funded by the city through the police budget, but the DA's office is funded by the county. So it might be a bit complicated to take from one to give to the other, but the county has millions in surplus this year. So funding a complaint room with county dollars isn't unreasonable.
I would agree. The other thing is, you know, in theory, you could do the schedule. I mean, the way that New York City does it, they use a civilian employee of the police department. I don't know that that's the only way that you would have to do it. I mean, you could have the DA, a non-attorney employee of the DA's office, acting as a liaison with the police department to check all of their schedules. So there are, probably more than one way to figure out that as well.
Thank you. So one question I have, because it doesn't look like we have any others right now, which is okay, capacity and all that, is now that we've read the report, we've seen your presentation, we've also heard from Dijon, what are the next steps? And I'll ask you, Miles, and then I'll go to Dijon. That ideally, you know, since we do have the power, what would you like to see the powers that be do with your report to translate it into a solution that we're hoping to see?
So a few things. First, I would like for the city's law department to tell us whether we're wrong or not, to say like, hey, this is, you know, we can't do this because X, Y, or Z, or explain why they haven't been doing this. I've spoken to people in the law department who have said that this is accurate, that this is good law. I've spoken with people who have represented police unions who have said that this is accurate and that it's good law. It also, again, the Attorney General of New York State said that, you know, we could change the police disciplinary system here. So I would like for someone in the city government to explain why they aren't doing this already. I think that we could push the mayor and the police commissioner to implement new disciplinary measures based on the police commissioner's authority today. And I think a longer term goal would be to advocate for greater disciplinary authority for the police advisory board by talking to common council members, educating them on this. And I know that there's a proposal right now, and maybe someone from the advisory board knows more about where it is right now. But last I heard, there was a proposal on the table from the council to sort of revamp the advisory board, but it still didn't give the advisory board any teeth. And it seemed to take the Rochester example as a reason why the advisory board couldn't be given any more teeth. So I would hope that the Common Council would also be educated as to their powers and use them fully, rather than fighting this issue of police misconduct with one hand tied behind our back, which is what we've been doing. But those would be the next steps for me. Would be law department, police commissioner, Common Council, lean on all of them and get this done.
Well, I am much more of the, I guess, radical one, where I say go around them, go through them, right? New York State municipal home rule law allows for direct city charter amendments through popular referendum. And that is the process that Voice Buffalo has taken. That is the police oversight model that has been received and filed by Common Council. The way that process works is you would circulate a petition to get 10% of the voting population in the last gubernatorial election. In the city of Buffalo, that was 79,000 people that voted for the last gubernatorial election, which means about 8,000 signatures were collected in order to get the model before the Common Council. Once it's before the Common Council, they have 2 months to act on the legislation. The Common Council received it, I want to say back in August, and tabled it 2 months ago, this very week. And when they table, instead of taking direct action, the folks who circulated the petition have the option to circulate a second petition where they only need to get 5% of the last gubernatorial election voting population's signature. In other words, about 3,500 signatures. And once they collect those and submit it to the clerk, it then goes to the ballot for direct vote from the people. I think that that's a much easier process than educating folks who should already have the education, than relying on folks who clearly are not interested in the oversight that's necessary for for the people they claim to represent. And I also just want to take time to point out what structures currently exist and sort of prohibit, I think, Common Council members from taking the necessary actions. First and foremost, they are elected and they require union support, including and not limited to the Buffalo Police Union, who is clearly against this sort of model. Secondly, all legislation for the Common Council has to be approved as to form by the city's law department, which is helmed by the Corporation Council, who is directly appointed by the city's mayor. If the mayor finds that a police oversight model like this is not in the city's best interest, it stands to reason that perhaps the city's law department may find that it's not in the best interest of the city and may advise Common Council that that is the case. And so a lot of the narrative that's been driven so far about how state law, which Miles has accurately rebuffed, state law stands in the way, is just simply not true. We've all heard from Miles on why that is. And I think the next step for us isn't necessary to educate a law department, which already knows this is good law, but instead take it in our own hands. I think that's all I'll say before I get upset.
I agree with Dejan. I mean, I'm all for going around them and doing it ourselves. The only caveat I would maybe add is that we saw how people voted. I mean, the biggest issue in this recent mayoral election was policing, right? Policing, right? This is what happens every time any municipality anywhere, whether it's Buffalo, New York in the 70s, Boston in the 70s, when they were trying to curb police disciplinary authority, police did this whole Fear City campaign, right? They scared the crap out of civilians and said, oh, if you take away our, ability to discipline ourselves, everyone's just gonna, this is gonna be bedlam. It's gonna be like the purge, right? Every day. people are susceptible to that. And I think that we we go forward on a measure like that where we trust the public to do this at our peril. Like, the public are easily scared into giving away their rights. We just saw that. I mean, we went from 2020, everybody on the streets talking about Black Lives Matter, to, you know, people going into that voting booth and voting for a Blue Lives Matter ticket, right? So I don't know. I mean, I would love to see, I think it's easier to educate. And also I will say that we've seen the Common Council move away from the will of the mayor. We saw with the right to know law, which was not exactly groundbreaking, but it was something that the police union opposed heavily. And still that law was passed, even over the objections of the police union, even over the constant machinations of the law department. It passed by a 7-2 veto-proof majority. I think it might be easier to press those 7 people than it is to educate the entire voting populace as to why disciplining police isn't going to equal more of the crime that they already fear and that they seem so susceptible to. But I don't know. Whichever way, I mean, I'd say first past the post, do them all, and whichever way works, you know, we get to it.
You know.
Can I ask Deja a quick question? I know that you guys were, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, before that, I just wanted to quickly comment on what Miles has laid out for us. I think that the information that you've provided is very similar to the information that the Police Advisory Board was giving to Common Council a year ago. So it's not like they're uneducated on the issue, it's they're unwilling to act on the issue. And that is why I'm all for the referendum idea. And I do hear you on your analysis of the most recent mayoral election. I think, however, we run the risk of sort of, let me rephrase that. I don't think that we can say that the most recent mayoral election boiled down to a singular issue. And even if we do, policing is a multivariate issue, and we don't know which aspect led people to vote which way. The fact of the matter is, throughout the state of New York, when we look at Syracuse, Rochester, New York City, folks are moving towards police accountability and police oversight. And I don't think Buffalo would be any different. I think there's a big difference between defunding, which allows people to be scared just by nature of the language, into thinking that there will be less police on the street, versus when misconduct arises, there will be accountability, which does not take away from your safety. It does not take away from your ability to call the police, and it does not take away the access to officers or the number of officers you have access to. And I think those differences are huge. That's just my point. But go ahead, Dom.
I love it. I love both ways. I feel like we should just shoot it at all angles at this point. Can't, hurt. But I do have a question. I know that you guys were working towards the ballot initiative, and the goal was the general election, this past election. Do you have any update on how those numbers went? And are they, once we sign the petition, how long do those signatures, how long are they good for? And do we have to wait till the next election in order to put it on the ballot, right?
So in terms of which ballot, I think that becomes a question for the Board of Elections. We wouldn't control how that works. They can call special election. It can be on the primary ballot. It could be on the next general. I'm not sure. But what I will say is, as of this week, the Voice Buffalo Police Ballot Initiative can submit an additional 3,500 signatures and force it onto the ballot. What will they do that? I don't know. What that will look like in terms of when the next election is, I can't answer that either.
Thank you all so much. And Dominique, actually, you just had my question, because I was thinking the same thing. It is now 1:38. Obviously, we were supposed to go till 2 o'clock, but I won't hold everybody here unless there are other burning questions. And with that, I just want to thank everybody for coming. Thank you, Miles, also to writing the report. Thank you, Dejan, for coming, and also for writing the oversight bill. And I just wanted to get y'all's final thoughts before we wrap up. And since Dijon is on my screen, I'll go to him first.
I just want to thank you all for including me in this conversation, and I look forward to future conversations on this topic. I really hope you all stay involved, actively reach out, as Miles suggested, to your common counselors, but also become more engaged with the Police Advisory Board, who cannot operate in a silo. It needs the help of everyone. So please reach out and support them in whatever way you can. That's all.
You guys are all amazing. Thank you guys so much, Dejan and Miles, for all your research and all your dedication and everything you continue to do, and partnership for public good. You guys are amazing with your numbers. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Miles, final thoughts?
I just, first of all, thank you all for coming. This is kind of an in the weeds topic. I told one of my other cousins what I was doing, and their response was just like, man, you're in the trenches. Like, this is a really, in their topic. And so for people to like come and actually be interested about it is really cool. And I appreciate all of you. And I know that a lot of you have also done a lot of this work. So I just want to lift that up, Dijon and Dominique and everyone who's on the Police Advisory Board who was on it. I would just say, like, keep pushing and fight like hell. This is something that needs to change. This is something that can change. The justifications for changing it are there. The Court of Appeals is a lot more powerful than the Buffalo Common Council, and they're with us. The State Attorney General is with us. So I think, whether it's through a referendum, whether it's through pressuring the mayor and the police commissioner, whether it's through pressuring the Common Council and showing up at every police oversight committee meeting and saying, look, this is why you need different police accountability, because they were supposed to come to you. The police department was supposed to come to you with this information, and they haven't again. It's the umpteenth time that this has happened. Whatever we need to do to keep pushing this issue, to keep it in front of the eyes of the people who make the decisions on these issues, the Common Council, the mayor, and the police commissioner, and figure out a way to break the dam and get this done. I would just say keep pushing and fight like hell. And if there's any other questions, any other research that needs to be done, that's why people like me are here. And just thank you so much to Tombier for hosting this, and Cricky for helping to organize it, and to Andrea for helping to edit this report and put it all together. And thank you all. So that's all.
And curveball, I actually just got one last question. If y'all have time, I'm sorry. If y'all didn't eat, don't bite me. But the question is, do you think the Attorney General has the authority to actually hold our electeds accountable?
I'll give the typical lawyer answers. It depends. I don't know what kind of accountability you're talking about. So.
I've written on the subject a few times on different issues, and I've gotten letters back saying that no, her office can't hold certain things accountable. The police being one of them, the DA being one of them, but I don't know how true that is.
Well, I mean, she could certainly, open an investigation against them and sue them for misconduct if she wanted to. But again, in terms of changing the way police discipline works, no, she wouldn't have that authority. That would have to come, I think, from either the Common Council doing it, or a lawsuit being decided by the Court of Appeals and setting precedent.
Or the state.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Right, or the state legislature, right, which we often forget about, but they're there too.
Well,
technically.
I'll explain real quick. Tavier, I'm sorry to be private. I didn't know if she was going to take the extra question. So, that the AG had sent a letter to the mayor after they failed to implement any of the reforms suggested by the governor. And then, of course, we were one of the groups, or I don't know if we were one of, but we sent a letter to the AG's office and subsequently met with them and was basically told like that they couldn't really do much of anything. So I guess like, what was her purpose in sending the letter in the first place then?
Well, I think the point was, this is the chief prosecutor in the state of New York, and she's lending her weight as an attorney to the police advisory board's proposal. I think that was huge. So I think that was the point, was to say, you know, hey, look, I'm the chief prosecutor in the state and I agree with these people. So what are all you other people doing? I think that was the point of the letter. And I thought it was really important. And I think it, again, helps to show that, like, you know, state law, including the people who, you know, enforce state laws, are behind a shift in police accountability.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
I guess I'll just add to that point. And first, from a personal standpoint, you know, when I was on the police advisory board, we would hear from a lot of folks, well, you guys can't do anything about policing directly. But there is power in words, right? There's soft power and there's hard power. We may not have had power to discipline, but it would be false to suggest that the police advisory board has been ineffective in moving the needle when it comes to things like the body cameras, police oversight, police handbook. We've suggested things and put narratives out in the media that got folks to think about it. Because otherwise, we'd continue to be led by elected officials who have gaslit us for years. This issue of police oversight is, I think, the greatest example. Miles has laid out in a very well-researched report how for years they've been telling us that state law prohibits certain things from being done, basically lying to the public, either by ignorance or by deliberate action. And here is the person charged with defending the state constitution, who is elected by not just those in the city of Buffalo, but statewide, chiming in and saying, no, your local leaders are wrong. You, the civilians, the citizens, the residents of Buffalo are right. You can change the way you are, the way police are held accountable in your city, and you can put power directly in your hands. And I think that that was an immensely powerful statement. I'm a bit saddened that local media didn't really pick up on it, but that's a whole different power dynamic and issue that hopefully can be discussed at a later time.
Thank you so much. And I don't see any more questions. And so with that, we already have final thoughts. If you haven't read Miles' report, please do so. Please share it. We also have the link to Dejan's oversight bill that he drafted that we will recirculate, and just continue to stay plugged in because we got some really, really great information today. So thank you to Miles, to Dejan, also to Dominique for speaking on behalf of the Buffalo Police Advisory Board, and all of y'all who are here with us. Thank you to everybody who came today, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.